Welcome. Get comfortable. Settle into your bed or your chair. Let your body relax and prepare for a gentle journey through the history of golf. This isn't going to be a typical documentary, fast-paced and demanding your attention. This is something different. This is designed to help you drift off to sleep while learning about one of the world's oldest and most fascinating games. Over the next couple of hours, we're going to meander through golf's long story, from its medieval origins in Scotland through to the modern era. We'll move slowly, taking our time with each development, each innovation, each milestone. There's no rush here, no dramatic music, no urgent narration, just a calm, steady voice guiding you through the centuries. We'll begin with golf's earliest days, those stick and ball games played across the European countryside in the 1300s and 1400s. We'll watch as the game takes root in Scotland, survives royal bans, gains royal approval, and slowly spreads across Britain and then across the world. We'll see how the equipment evolved, from feathery balls to gutties to rubber wound balls to the modern multi-layer designs. We'll witness the formation of the great championships, the rise of legendary players, the expansion of the professional game. Along the way, we'll encounter the giants of golf history, Bobby Jones and his amateur brilliance, Ben Hogan and his relentless pursuit of perfection, Arnold Palmer and his charismatic appeal, Jack Nicklaus and his record 18 major championships, Tiger Woods and his dominant reign. We'll see how women's golf established itself, how the game spread globally, how technology changed what was possible, how television brought golf to millions of new fans. And after we've traveled through the chronological history, we'll visit some of golf's most sacred places. St. Andrews, where it all began. Augusta National, the cathedral of American golf. Pebble Beach, where the land meets the Pacific in dramatic beauty. We'll explore what makes these courses special, what gives them their character and their place in golf's story. Then we'll revisit some of the great rivalries and moments that have defined eras. Palmer versus Nicklaus in the 1960s. Watson versus Nicklaus in the late 70s and early 80s. Greg Norman's heartbreaking near misses. Tiger Woods' period of complete dominance. These competitions that transcended mere sport and became stories that golf fans tell and retell. The style will be conversational, unhurried, descriptive. We'll elaborate on each fact, giving context and color, painting pictures with words. We'll use smooth transitions, letting one topic flow naturally into the next, creating a continuous narrative that you can follow as long as you like or drift away from whenever sleep takes you. There's no test at the end, no need to remember everything. This is just a peaceful journey through a fascinating subject. Some of you might be golf fans looking for a way to fall asleep while revisiting the game you love. Some of you might know nothing about golf but find the gentle narration soothing. Either way, you're welcome here. Golf's story is rich enough to be interesting and gentle enough to ease you towards sleep. So adjust your pillow, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin our journey through the long, winding, fascinating history of golf. Let's begin our journey through the history of golf by traveling back in time, back to an era when the game we know today was just beginning to take shape in the minds and hands of people who could scarcely imagine what it would become. In the 13th and 14th centuries, across the landscapes of continental Europe, people were playing various stick and ball games. These weren't golf as we know it, but they were certainly ancestors of a sort. There was a game called chole, played in parts of France and the Low Countries, where players would strike a ball across country toward a distant target. Then there was jeu de maille, another French pastime, where participants used mallets to propel balls along designated courses. These games shared something fundamental with golf, a simple pleasure in striking a ball with a stick, in aiming for a goal, in the gentle competition of skill and distance. The countryside itself became the playing field, and the games could stretch across fields and through villages, a leisurely pursuit that filled afternoon hours. Now, we move forward to the year 1421, a specific moment that connects Scotland to these continental traditions. A Scottish regiment stationed abroad encountered the French game of chole. Picture these soldiers, far from home, watching the locals play their game, perhaps joining in themselves. They would have seen the equipment, the technique, the rules such as they were. And when these men eventually returned to Scotland, they brought something back with them, not just memories of foreign lands, but ideas about games, about leisure, about how one might spend time striking a ball across open ground. It's one of those quiet historical moments that we can't fully document, but it represents a seed being planted, a cultural exchange that would grow into something distinctly Scottish. By 1457, golf had become enough of a phenomenon in Scotland that it caught the attention of the authorities, and not in a good way. The Scottish Parliament, under King James II, issued a ban on golf, as it was spelled then. The reason was quite practical from the Crown's perspective. Scotland was a nation that needed to maintain its military readiness, and archery was considered an essential skill for national defense. But the Scottish people were becoming distracted by this game of golf, spending time that should have been devoted to archery practice instead chasing balls across the links. The ban is actually one of the earliest written references we have to golf in Scotland, and it tells us something important. The game was already popular enough to be seen as a problem. People weren't just occasionally playing. They were choosing golf over their mandated archery practice, which suggests the game had already developed a certain addictive quality, that same quality that golfers today might recognize. The restrictions on golf didn't end in 1457. Between 1471 and 1491, during the reigns of James III and James IV, the authorities renewed these bans multiple times. The fact that they had to keep banning it tells us that people kept playing it anyway. Laws that need constant renewal are laws that aren't being followed. The Scottish people, it seems, were quite determined to play their golf, regardless of what Parliament said. But gradually, attitudes began to shift. As the immediate military pressures eased somewhat, and as archery became less critical to Scotland's defense, the strict prohibitions began to relax. By the later part of this period, the tone of the restrictions had softened, suggesting that perhaps golf wasn't such a terrible distraction after all. Then comes 1502, a watershed moment in golf's history. King James IV himself lifted the ban entirely. But he didn't just make golf legal again. He became a golfer himself. We have records showing that James IV purchased golf clubs and balls, making him the first royal golfer that we can definitively document. Imagine what this meant for the game's status. When a king plays golf, suddenly it's not just a common pastime that distracts from archery. It's a royal pursuit, something dignified and worthy. James IV's endorsement transformed golf's social standing overnight. The very game that had been banned as a wasteful distraction was now a game fit for a king. In the early 1500s, with royal approval secured, golf began to establish itself more firmly around Edinburgh and East Lothian. These areas, with their coastal links land, provided ideal terrain for the game. The word links itself refers to the sandy, undulating ground that connects the beach to more fertile inland areas. This land wasn't particularly useful for farming, but it was perfect for golf. The grass was kept naturally short by grazing animals and the strong coastal winds. The ground was firm, and the natural contours and hazards, the dunes and hollows, the patches of rough ground, created interesting and challenging playing conditions. People in these areas began playing regularly, and the game started to develop more consistent rules and conventions. It was becoming less of a casual folk game and more of an organized sport. By 1552, golf had become so established that it received formal recognition on the links at St. Andrews. St. Andrews, of course, would go on to become the home of golf, the most famous golf course in the world. But in 1552, it was simply receiving acknowledgement that golf was being played there regularly, and that the community recognized this as a legitimate use of the links land. This formal recognition is important because it shows that golf was no longer just something people did informally. It had become an institution, something that communities took seriously enough to officially sanction and protect. After the Union of the Crowns in 1603, when James VI of Scotland also became James I of England, golf began to spread southward into England. The period from 1603 to the 1620s saw golf gradually being introduced to English society. The Scottish king brought his love of golf with him to London, and where the monarch goes, fashion follows. English nobility and gentry began to take up the game, though it would never quite capture English hearts the way it had in Scotland. Still, this geographical expansion was crucial for golf's future. The game was no longer confined to one nation. It was beginning its journey toward becoming an international sport. In 1618, another significant milestone arrived with a royal charter that permitted golf to be played on Leith links. Leith, near Edinburgh, was already a popular golfing venue, but this charter gave it official status and protection. Royal charters were important legal documents that granted specific rights and privileges. This one essentially said that golf at Leith was a protected activity, something that couldn't be arbitrarily forbidden or interfered with. It represented another step in golf's journey from folk game to established institution. Finally, in 1735, we reached the formation of the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers in a recognizable club form. This is where golf begins to transition into something truly modern. Before this, golf clubs existed in a loose, informal sense. Groups of people who played together regularly. But the Honourable Company represented something new. A formal organization with rules, membership, recorded meetings, and competitions. This was golf beginning to organize itself, to create the structures that would allow it to grow and standardize. The Honourable Company would go on to write some of the first formal rules of golf, helping to transform the game from a pastime with local variations into a sport with consistent, agreed-upon regulations. And so, from those early stick and ball games in medieval Europe, through military encounters and royal bands, from a king's purchasing of clubs to formal charters and organized clubs, golf had traveled a long road. By the mid-18th century, it had transformed from a distraction that worried parliaments into a structured sport with its own institutions and traditions, a sport that was ready to continue growing and evolving into the game we know today. As we continue our gentle journey through golf's history, we arrive at a pivotal moment in 1744, when something quite remarkable happened at Leith Links. For the first time, someone sat down and wrote out the rules of golf. Not just casual understandings or traditions passed down by word of mouth, but actual written rules, 13 of them to be precise, drafted specifically for play at Leith Links. Before this moment, golf had been governed by local custom and informal agreement. Different places might play slightly differently, and disputes would be settled by common sense or by whoever had the most authority in the group. But now there were written rules, a codification of how the game should be played. These 13 rules covered the essential elements: how to tee off, what to do if your ball landed in a hazard, the order of play, the etiquette expected of gentlemen golfers. It was a simple document, really nothing like the extensive rulebooks we have today, but it represented something profound. Golf was becoming standardized, formalized, transformed from folk game into a sport with agreed-upon regulations that could be referred to and enforced. Just a decade later, in 1754, another crucial development occurred when the Society of St. Andrew's Golfers was founded. This organization would eventually become the Royal and Ancient Golf Club, the R&A, one of the two governing bodies of golf worldwide. But in 1754, it was simply a group of gentlemen who enjoyed the game and wanted to play it together in an organized fashion. They established membership, they held regular competitions, they created a structure for their golfing activities. St. Andrews was already well known as a golfing venue, those links by the North Sea where golf had been formally recognized 2 centuries earlier, and now it had its own dedicated society of golfers. The formation of this society meant that St. Andrews was becoming more than just a place to play golf. It was becoming a center of golf, a place where the game's traditions and standards would be preserved and developed. In 1764, something happened at St. Andrews that would eventually change golf courses around the entire world. The links at St. Andrews adopted an 18-hole layout. Now, this might seem like an arbitrary number, and in some ways it was. The old course at St. Andrews had originally been played as 22 holes, 11 holes out to a distant point and then the same 11 holes back. But the course was reorganized, some holes were combined, and the result was 18 holes, 9 out and 9 back. It was a practical decision based on the specific geography and layout of that particular links, nothing more. But St. Andrews was becoming increasingly influential in the golf world, and other clubs looked to St. Andrews as a model. Gradually, over the decades and centuries that followed, 18 holes became the standard. It became what a proper golf course should have, not because of any scientific study or mathematical formula, but because that's what they did at St. Andrews, and St. Andrews mattered. It's a lovely example of how traditions can emerge from quite ordinary, practical decisions and then take on a life of their own. As we move through the late 1700s, golf was beginning to spread its roots more widely across Scotland and into England. Golf clubs, meaning both the organizations and the actual places to play, started appearing in more towns. This wasn't a sudden explosion, more like a gradual percolation of the game into new communities. A group of gentlemen in one town would hear about golf, perhaps some of them had played it elsewhere, and they would decide to form their own club, to lay out their own course on suitable land. Each new club was a small triumph for the game, another place where golf was establishing itself, creating its own traditions and competitions, adding to the growing tapestry of golfing culture. In 1788, the Edinburgh Burgess Golfing Society received formal recognition. This society would later become the Royal Burgess Golfing Society, and it claims to be the oldest golf club in the world with continuous records. The recognition in 1788 formalized what had likely been happening informally for some time, a group of burgesses or citizens of Edinburgh who gathered to play golf together. These early golf clubs were very much social institutions, places where men of similar social standing could gather, compete, socialize, and enjoy the game together. Golf was becoming woven into the social fabric of Scottish society, part of how communities organized their leisure time and maintained their social bonds. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the equipment of golf was evolving too, particularly the ball. The feathery ball became the dominant type of golf ball during this period. The feathery was an extraordinary piece of craftsmanship. It was made by stuffing a leather pouch, typically made from 3 pieces of horse or cow hide, with enough feathers, usually goose feathers, to fill a top hat. The feathers were boiled first, which made them soft and compact. Then they were stuffed into the leather casing while both the feathers and leather were still wet. As everything dried, the feathers expanded and the leather contracted, creating a ball that was hard and relatively round. Each feathery had to be handmade by skilled craftsmen, which made them expensive. They also didn't last very long. They could split if they landed on a stone or got too wet in the rain. But when they were dry and well struck, they could fly remarkably well, better than the earlier wooden balls that had been used. The feathery represented the state of the art in golf ball technology for well over a century, and golfers accepted its limitations as simply part of the game. The clubs themselves were also becoming more specialized during the late 1700s. Early golfers might have played with just a few clubs, perhaps even just 1 or 2, but as the game developed, players and club makers began to realize that different shots required different tools. The long nose was a long-headed wooden club used for distance, its elongated head designed to sweep the ball away from a good lie. The niblick was a shorter iron club with a small, heavy head, useful for hacking the ball out of difficult lies or bunkers. The spoon was another wooden club with a slightly concave face, useful for getting the ball airborne from various lies. These names might sound quaint to us now, but each club type represented an evolution in golf technology. An understanding that the variety of situations a golfer faces on the course requires a variety of tools. Players began carrying more clubs, and the strategy of the game became more sophisticated as a result. The 1810s and 1820s saw golf continuing its spread from Scotland into England. Blackheath, in southeast London, became an important early center of English golf. The game was still primarily Scottish, that's where the overwhelming majority of golfers and clubs were, but it was putting down roots in English soil. English gentlemen who had encountered the game in Scotland brought it home with them, or Scots living in England established clubs to continue playing the game they loved. This geographical expansion was gradual and somewhat limited. Golf wouldn't truly explode in popularity until later, but these early footholds in England were important for the game's future development as an international sport. In 1824, the Perth Golfing Society achieved something that brought considerable prestige. They gained royal patronage and became known as Royal Perth. Royal patronage was a mark of distinction, a signal that the monarchy recognized and approved of the organization. For golf clubs, gaining the royal prefix was an honor that elevated their status and often their membership rolls as well. Royal Perth's achievement reflected both golf's growing respectability as a pursuit and the continuing interest of the royal family in the game that James IV had first taken up more than 3 centuries earlier. Finally, in 1834, the Society of St. Andrews Golfers underwent its own transformation when it became the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews. This wasn't just a name change. It was a recognition of the club's special status in the golf world. St. Andrews was already the most prestigious golf club in Scotland, perhaps in the world, and now it had the royal seal of approval to confirm that status. The R&A, as it came to be known, would go on to play a central role in governing golf, writing and interpreting the rules, organizing championships, and preserving the traditions of the game. But in 1834, it was simply a moment of recognition, an acknowledgement that this particular club in this particular town, on these particular links by the North Sea, held a special place in golf's heart and history. And so golf continued its journey, from those first written rules at Leith to the royal recognition at St. Andrews, from feathery balls to specialized clubs, from a Scottish game to one that was beginning to find homes across Britain. The game was organizing itself, standardizing itself, preparing itself for the next stages of growth that lay ahead. As we drift further into golf's story, we arrive at 1848, a year that brought a revolutionary change to the game, though it came from a rather unexpected source. A reverend named Adam Patterson introduced a new type of golf ball made from a material called gutta percha. Gutta percha was a rubbery substance derived from the sap of trees found in Malaysia. It had been brought to Britain and found various industrial uses, but Reverend Patterson saw something else in it. He realized that this material could be heated and molded into a sphere, and when it cooled, it would retain its shape and have properties that made it suitable for golf. The gut-tie ball, as it came to be known, was a revelation. Unlike the expensive, handcrafted feathery balls that could cost as much as a club, gutties were relatively cheap to produce. They were more durable, they performed reasonably well in wet conditions, and if they got damaged or knocked out of round, you could simply heat them up again and reshape them. This democratization of golf equipment was profound. Suddenly, golf became more accessible to people who couldn't afford a constant supply of expensive feathery balls. The gut-tie ball didn't just change what golfers played with. It changed who could afford to play golf at all. In the 1850s, golfers began to notice something curious about their gut-tie balls. A brand new, smooth gut-tie didn't fly as well as one that had been knocked about a bit, one that had nicks and marks and rough patches on its surface. This accidental discovery led to deliberate action. Club makers and players started hammering patterns into the surface of new gutties, creating texture before the ball had even been played. These hammered patterns, these intentional roughenings of the ball's surface, were the ancestors of the dimples we see on every golf ball today. Nobody in the 1850s understood the aerodynamics of what they were doing. They didn't know about turbulent boundary layers or the physics of drag reduction, but they knew empirically that a textured ball flew better than a smooth one, and so they textured their balls. It's a lovely example of practical experimentation leading to lasting innovation, of golfers figuring out what worked through trial and error, even without understanding why it worked. In 1851, golf continued its geographical expansion when the Royal Curragh Golf Club was founded in Ireland. Ireland, with its close ties to Scotland and its own suitable landscapes for golf, was a natural place for the game to take root. The Curragh, a vast plain in County Kildare, provided open ground where golf could be played, and the establishment of a formal club there marked Ireland's entry into the growing world of golf. The Irish would develop their own rich golfing traditions, and today Ireland is home to some of the world's most celebrated golf courses. But it all traces back to moments like this, when the first clubs were formed and the first courses were laid out on Irish soil. The 1850s and 1860s saw an even more dramatic expansion as golf began spreading across the British Empire. In India, British colonial administrators and military officers, far from home and seeking familiar recreations, established golf clubs. These clubs appeared in various Indian cities, bringing golf to a climate and landscape vastly different from the Scottish links where the game had originated. But the adaptability of golf, the fact that it could be played wherever you could find suitable ground, meant that it could travel with the empire. This same pattern repeated across the empire. Wherever British influence extended, golf followed, carried by expatriates who wanted to continue playing the game they knew from home. It was the beginning of golf's transformation into a truly global sport, though at this stage it remained closely tied to British colonial presence. Then, in 1860, something happened that would change the nature of golf forever. The first Open Championship was held at Prestwick Golf Club in Scotland. This wasn't just another local competition. It was conceived as an Open Championship, a tournament to determine who was truly the best golfer, at least among those who could make it to Prestwick that year. 8 professionals competed in that first Open, playing 3 rounds of Prestwick's 12-hole course in a single day. Willie Park Sr. won with a score of 174, and he received a prize of nothing at all, actually, except prestige and a red Morocco leather belt that would be held by the champion. That first Open was a modest affair, but it represented something new in golf, the idea of a championship that would be played annually, that would bring together the best players, that would crown a champion who could claim to be the finest golfer of the year. The very next year, in 1861, the Open Championship made an important change. It opened itself to both amateurs and professionals. Previously, in 1860, it had been for professionals only, but now any skilled golfer could compete, regardless of whether they played for money or for the pure love of the game. This inclusivity was important for the championship's credibility and appeal. Some of the finest golfers were amateurs, gentlemen who didn't need to earn money from the game but who played to an exceptionally high standard. By opening the championship to all comers, the Open ensured that it would truly identify the best golfer, not just the best professional. This openness, this lack of restriction based on amateur or professional status, would become one of the defining characteristics of the Open Championship. From 1864 to 1870, the Open Championship was dominated by 2 remarkable golfers, both named Tom Morris. Old Tom Morris and his son, young Tom Morris, were perhaps the first true golf celebrities, certainly the first whose names became widely known beyond their local communities. Old Tom was already an established figure in golf, a skilled player and club and ball maker, a man who understood every aspect of the game. But his son, young Tom, was a prodigy, a golfer of extraordinary talent who brought a new level of skill to the game. Between them, father and son won the Open Championship 6 times during this 7-year period. They became symbols of golfing excellence, and their competitions, whether against each other or against other players, drew attention and excitement. Golf was beginning to have its heroes, its storylines, its dynasties. In 1870, young Tom Morris achieved something that had never been done before. He won the Open Championship for the third consecutive year. Under the rules of the time, this meant he got to keep the challenge belt, the red Morocco leather belt that had been awarded to the Open champion, permanently. It was his to keep forever, a reward for his unprecedented achievement. This created a slight problem, of course, because now there was no trophy to compete for. The Open Championship wasn't held in 1871, while the organizers sorted out what to do about a new trophy. But young Tom's 3 consecutive victories, achieved at the ages of 18, 19, and 20, established him as perhaps the greatest golfer of his era, a player whose skill transcended what had come before. When the Open Championship resumed in 1873, there was a new trophy, one that would become iconic in its own right. The Claret Jug, formerly known as the Golf Champion Trophy, was first presented that year. This elegant silver jug, which actually resembled the claret jugs used for wine, became the symbol of Open Championship victory. Even today, when golfers win the Open, they receive the claret jug, though they only get to keep it for a year before returning it and receiving a replica. That jug, first presented in 1873, has been held by every Open champion since, connecting modern winners to those early champions, to young Tom Morris and all the golfers who came after him. During the 1870s, golf's global spread continued with clubs being founded in Australia and New Zealand. These distant outposts of the British Empire, on the other side of the world from Scotland, now had their own golf clubs and courses. In Australia, the climate and landscape were radically different from Scottish links, yet golf adapted. Courses were built, clubs were formed, and Australians and New Zealanders began developing their own golfing cultures. The game that had begun on the windswept coasts of Scotland was now being played on the other side of the globe, in entirely different environments, by people who might never see a Scottish links but who loved the game just the same. And so the third quarter of the 19th century saw golf transform in fundamental ways. The gut-tie ball made it more accessible. The Open Championship gave it a pinnacle of competition. The Morris family gave it heroes and storylines, and the game spread across continents and oceans, finding new homes and new lands, always adapting, always growing, always adding new chapters to its ever-lengthening story. As we continue our peaceful journey through the story of golf, we arrive at 1873, the same year the claret jug was first presented, when another significant development was taking shape. The Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews was beginning to emerge as the central authority on the rules of golf, at least outside of the United States. This wasn't an overnight transformation or an official declaration. Rather, it was a gradual recognition by golfers and clubs around the world that the RNA's interpretation of the rules carried special weight. When disputes arose about how the game should be played, when questions emerged about what was or wasn't allowed, golf clubs increasingly looked to St. Andrews for guidance. The RNA began to take on a role that went beyond just governing its own club and competitions. It was becoming the custodian of golf's laws, the body that would preserve, interpret, and update the rules as the game evolved. This process of becoming the rules authority would continue to develop over the coming decades, but 1873 marks the point where we can see it clearly beginning to happen. 15 years later, in 1888, golf took a momentous step when the St. Andrews Golf Club was founded in Yonkers, New York. This wasn't the first time golf had been played in America. There had been occasional earlier attempts, but the St. Andrews Golf Club in Yonkers was the first permanent, successful golf club in the United States. A Scottish immigrant named John Reed and some friends started playing golf on a field in Yonkers, and from that casual beginning, they formed a club. At first, they played on a simple 3-hole course laid out in a cow pasture, then later moved to an apple orchard, where they were sometimes called the apple tree gang because they hung their coats on the apple trees while they played. It might seem humble, almost comical, but this was the seed from which American golf would grow. The game was finally establishing a real foothold in the United States, and within a few years, that foothold would expand into a vast American golf culture that would eventually rival and in some ways surpass the British game that had given it birth. By 1890, golf in Britain was undergoing another important transformation with the development of inland courses and improved drainage techniques. Until this point, golf had been primarily played on links land, those coastal areas with sandy soil and natural drainage. But as the game grew more popular, there simply weren't enough links to accommodate everyone who wanted to play. The solution was to build courses inland, on heavier soil that previously would have been considered unsuitable for golf. This required new techniques in drainage, ways to keep the ground firm enough for play even after rain, ways to create proper putting surfaces on soil that wasn't naturally sandy. As these techniques improved, golf courses began appearing in places far from the coast, in the interior of England and Scotland, in areas that had never had golf before. This meant that people who lived nowhere near a links could now have a golf course relatively nearby. It was another step in making golf more accessible, more democratic, more widely available to anyone who wanted to play. In 1893, women golfers achieved a significant milestone with the formation of the Ladies' Golf Union in Britain. Women had been playing golf for decades, of course, but they had often been marginalized, restricted to certain times of day, given inferior facilities, or simply not taken seriously as golfers. The Ladies' Golf Union gave women golfers their own organization, one that could establish competitions, set handicaps, and advocate for women's interests in the game. It was a statement that women's golf was legitimate, serious, and deserving of proper organization and recognition. The formation of the LGU was part of a broader movement in late Victorian Britain, where women were carving out spaces for themselves in sports and public life, pushing back against restrictions and demanding to be taken seriously in pursuits that had previously been male-dominated. That same year, 1893, brought another technological revolution to golf with the invention of the Haskell rubber wound ball. Coburn Haskell, an American, developed a ball that had a solid rubber core wrapped with elastic thread, all enclosed in a gutta-percha cover. This ball was livelier than the gut tie, it flew farther with the same effort, and it had better feel and control, especially around the greens. The Haskell ball represented a leap forward in golf ball technology comparable to the earlier shift from featheries to gutties. Professional and amateur golfers quickly recognized the advantages, and within a few years, the Haskell ball and its imitators had almost completely replaced the gut tie. Courses that had been challenging with gutties suddenly became shorter and easier with Haskells, which would eventually lead to courses being lengthened to maintain their challenge. The equipment evolution was driving changes in course design, in how the game was played, in scoring and strategy. In 1894, just 1 year after the St. Andrews Golf Club had helped spark American interest in golf, the United States Golf Association was founded. The USGA brought together several American golf clubs to create a national organization that could govern the game in America, establish uniform rules, set standards for handicapping, and organize national championships. The creation of the USGA meant that American golf now had its own authority structure, separate from but parallel to the R&A in Britain. For most of golf's rules, the USGA and R&A would remain aligned, but each would govern their own territories, and occasionally they would diverge on particular interpretations or regulations. The USGA's founding was recognition that golf in America had grown large enough and serious enough to need proper governance. The very next year, 1895, was a landmark year for American golf. The USGA organized the first U.S. Open, held at Newport Golf Club in Rhode Island. Horace Rawlins, a young English professional, won that first U.S. Open, completing 36 holes in a single day with a score of 173. That same year also saw the first U.S. Amateur Championship, which Charles Blair Macdonald won after having tried and failed to win the previous year's informal amateur championship. And 1895 also brought the first U.S. Women's Amateur Championship, won by Mrs. Charles S. Brown. These three championships, all in 1 year, established the structure of elite American golf. Now there were major tournaments to aspire to, championships that would determine who were the best golfers in America, titles that would be recorded and remembered. American golf had its own identity, its own competitive structure, its own history in the making. Also in 1895, Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, New York, opened as a major public golf course. This was significant because most golf courses at the time were private, belonging to clubs that required membership and fees that put them out of reach for ordinary people. Van Cortlandt Park was different. It was a public course, owned by the city, available to anyone who wanted to play for a modest fee. This was municipal golf, the idea that golf should be accessible to the public, not just to those who could afford country club memberships. Van Cortlandt Park demonstrated that golf could be provided as a public amenity, like a park or a library, something the community offered to its residents. This concept of public golf would grow tremendously in America over the coming decades, creating opportunities for millions of people to play the game. Between 1898 and 1900, golf settled on its two main competitive formats, stroke play and match play. These had both existed before, of course, but during this period they became clearly established as the two primary ways that serious competitive golf would be conducted. In stroke play, every shot counts toward your total score, and the player with the lowest total wins. It's a format that rewards consistency over an entire round or tournament. In match play, you compete hole by hole against an opponent, and whoever wins more holes wins the match. Individual high scores on particular holes matter less because you can only lose that one hole. The two formats require different strategies and mental approaches, and golf would continue to use both, with stroke play becoming the dominant format for most professional tournaments and match play remaining important for team competitions and certain prestigious amateur events. Finally, in 1900, golf achieved a form of global recognition when it was included in the Olympic Games in Paris. This was only the second modern Olympics, and the organizers were still figuring out which sports to include. Golf made the cut, with both men's and women's competitions. The Olympic golf tournaments were relatively small affairs, not attracting all the world's best players, and golf's Olympic appearance would prove to be temporary. The sport would be dropped from the Olympics after 1904 and wouldn't return for over a century. But for that moment in Paris in 1900, golf was an Olympic sport, recognized on the world's premier sporting stage as something worthy of international competition. And so, as the 19th century drew to a close, golf had transformed itself once again. It had spread across the Atlantic and taken root in America. It had organized itself with governing bodies and championships. It had opened itself more fully to women and to the public. It had improved its equipment and standardized its formats. The game that had been primarily Scottish, primarily coastal, primarily informal was now international, inland as well as coastal, and thoroughly organized. The 20th century lay ahead, and golf was ready for everything it would bring. As we drift into the early years of the 20th century, we find golf once more appearing at the Olympic Games, this time in St. Louis in 1904. The golf competition in St. Louis was even more modest than it had been in Paris 4 years earlier. The participants were almost entirely American, with very little international representation, and the event attracted relatively little attention even from the golf world. After St. Louis, golf was dropped from the Olympic program, where it would remain absent for over a century. The Olympics and golf simply hadn't found the right fit with each other. Golf already had its own major championships, its own international structure, and the Olympic tournament couldn't really compete with events like the Open Championship or the US Open for prestige or attention. So golf went its own way, and the Olympics moved on to other sports, and neither seemed particularly diminished by the parting. During the period from 1904 through the 1910s, something important was happening for the average golfer: the expansion of municipal courses in both Britain and the United States. Following the example set by places like Van Cortlandt Park, cities and towns began to see golf as a recreational amenity they could provide to their citizens. Municipal courses were built on public land, managed by local authorities, and made available to anyone who wanted to play for affordable green fees. This was golf's democratization continuing, the game moving beyond private clubs and becoming something that working people could enjoy. A municipal course might not have the manicured perfection of an exclusive country club, but it had something perhaps more valuable: accessibility. These public courses brought golf to new populations, introduced the game to people who would never have encountered it otherwise, and created generations of golfers who learned the game on municipal layouts. In 1907, a significant barrier fell when Arnaud Massy of France became the first golfer from continental Europe to win the Open Championship. Until this point, the Open had been dominated by British golfers, with occasional victories by Americans. But Massy, a professional from France, proved that continental Europeans could compete at the highest level. His victory at Hoylake was a statement that golf was truly international now, that excellence could emerge from anywhere, not just from the traditional golfing nations. Massy's win inspired golfers across continental Europe and demonstrated that the game was no longer the exclusive province of Britain and its former colonies. Between 1909 and the 1910s, golf equipment took its next evolutionary step with early experiments in steel shafts. Golf clubs had always been made with wooden shafts, typically hickory, which was strong and flexible but had its limitations. Hickory shafts could break, they varied in their characteristics from one shaft to another, and they were subject to changes in humidity and temperature. Steel offered the promise of consistency and durability. Early steel shaft experiments faced technical challenges and resistance from traditionalists who felt that steel would fundamentally change the game. The governing bodies initially banned steel shafts, but the experiments continued, and eventually the advantages would prove too significant to ignore. This was the beginning of a transition that would eventually make steel, and later graphite, the standard materials for golf club shafts. Then came 1913, and one of the most dramatic moments in golf history. Francis Ouimet, a 20-year-old amateur from Massachusetts, won the U.S. Open at the Country Club in Brookline. Ouimet wasn't supposed to win. He was competing against the greatest British professionals of the era, Harry Vardon and Ted Ray, both vastly more experienced and accomplished. But Ouimet, playing in front of hometown crowds, managed to tie them after 72 holes and then defeated them both in an 18-hole playoff. His victory was a sensation, front-page news across America. Here was a young amateur, a former caddy, defeating the titans of British professional golf on American soil. Ouimet's victory did more than just crown a champion. It sparked a golf boom in America. Suddenly, thousands of young Americans wanted to take up golf, inspired by the idea that an ordinary person, an amateur, could achieve such extraordinary success. Golf club memberships surged, new courses were built, and American golf entered a new era of popularity and growth. In 1916, professional golf in America took an important organizational step with the founding of the PGA of America and the inauguration of the PGA Championship. The PGA, the Professional Golfers Association, was created to serve the interests of golf professionals, both touring players and club professionals who taught and managed courses. The PGA Championship gave American professionals their own major championship, distinct from the U.S. Open, which was open to amateurs as well. That first PGA Championship was held in match play format, which would remain its format for many decades. Jim Barnes won that inaugural championship at Siwanoy Country Club in New York. The creation of the PGA represented the professionalization and organization of golf as a career, recognizing that professional golfers needed their own association to represent their interests and advance their profession. Also in 1916, something quite different happened at Pinehurst in North Carolina: the creation of the first miniature golf course. This wasn't golf as we've been discussing it, but rather a condensed, whimsical version played on a much smaller scale with obstacles and tricks. Miniature golf would go on to become its own form of entertainment, completely separate from regulation golf but sharing some of its basic elements. That first miniature golf course at Pinehurst was the ancestor of countless mini-golf courses that would appear around the world, providing a casual, accessible form of putting entertainment that required no golf skills and could be enjoyed by anyone. Then came 1917 and 1918, and the world descended into the tragedy of the First World War. Golf, like everything else, was disrupted. Championships were suspended or canceled. Golf clubs saw their memberships decline as men went off to war. Courses fell into disrepair as maintenance crews were depleted. Some courses were even commandeered for military use or agricultural production. The frivolity of playing golf seemed out of place when the world was engaged in such a terrible conflict. Golf didn't stop entirely, people still played when they could, but the organized, competitive side of the game largely went into hibernation. These were quiet years for golf, years of waiting and hoping for the war to end and for normal life, including the game, to resume. When peace came and the 1920s began, golf experienced a renaissance, and nowhere was this more evident than in course design. The 1920s saw strategic course design flourish under brilliant architects like Alister Mackenzie and Donald Ross. These designers approached golf courses as works of art and strategic challenges, creating layouts that rewarded thoughtful play and offered multiple ways to navigate each hole. Mackenzie, who would design Augusta National and many other celebrated courses, believed in creating courses that were enjoyable for golfers of all abilities while still challenging the best players. Ross, who designed Pinehurst No. 2 and hundreds of other courses, had his own design philosophy emphasizing strategic options and natural contours. These architects and others working in this golden age of golf course design created layouts that are still revered and played today, courses that have stood the test of time because they were built on sound strategic principles rather than mere difficulty. The 1920s courses changed how people thought about golf course architecture, elevating it to a profession and an art form. In 1922, a new star emerged when Bobby Jones won his first U.S. Open at Skokie Country Club in Illinois. Jones was only 20 years old, and this victory marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable careers in golf history. Bobby Jones was an amateur, a gentleman golfer who played for the love of the game rather than for money, and he would go on to dominate golf in the 1920s in a way few athletes have ever dominated their sport. But in 1922, that was all ahead of him. This first U.S. Open victory was just the opening chapter, the first indication that something special was emerging in American golf. Jones would become not just a great champion but a cultural icon, someone who transcended golf and became a symbol of sportsmanship, excellence, and grace under pressure. And so the early decades of the 20th century had carried golf through dramatic expansion, through the shock and disruption of World War, through technological evolution and artistic flowering in course design, and through the emergence of new champions who would capture the public imagination. The game continued to grow, to evolve, to adapt to changing times while maintaining its essential character, that timeless challenge of striking a ball toward a distant hole across varied terrain. As we continue our gentle journey through golf's story, we arrive at the early 1920s, specifically the years 1922 to 1924, when something extraordinary was being conceived. Bobby Jones, already establishing himself as one of the game's greatest players, began developing the concept and planning for what would become Augusta National Golf Club and its invitational tournament. Jones had a vision of creating a golf course that would embody everything he believed golf should be, a course that would challenge the best players while remaining enjoyable, that would incorporate strategic design principles that would be beautiful and memorable. He found a partner in this vision in Clifford Roberts, a New York investment banker, and together they began the careful planning that would eventually result in one of golf's most iconic venues. This wasn't rushed. It was thoughtful, deliberate planning for something that Jones and Roberts believed could be truly special, a golf course and a tournament that would set new standards for excellence. In 1927, international team golf took a momentous step forward with the first Ryder Cup match between Great Britain and the United States. Samuel Ryder, a British seed merchant and golf enthusiast, had donated a gold trophy to be competed for biennially between teams of professionals from both sides of the Atlantic. That first official Ryder Cup was held at Worcester Country Club in Massachusetts, and the American team won decisively. But the score was less important than what the event represented. A new form of golf competition based on national pride and team unity rather than individual glory. The Ryder Cup would grow to become one of golf's most treasured events, a competition where the pressure and emotion often exceed even the major championships because players are competing not just for themselves but for their teammates and their country. By 1929, Walter Hagen had become golf's first true celebrity professional, and he was popularizing a new lifestyle, that of the touring professional. Hagen was flamboyant and charismatic, arriving at tournaments in expensive cars, wearing fashionable clothes, staying in the finest hotels. He refused to be treated as a second-class citizen, as professionals had often been treated at exclusive clubs. Hagen demanded and received respect, and he showed that a professional golfer could live well from tournament winnings and exhibitions. His lifestyle and success inspired other golfers to pursue careers as touring professionals, playing tournaments around the country and the world rather than settling into jobs as club professionals. Hagen was demonstrating that professional golf could be glamorous, lucrative, and dignified, and his influence helped transform the professional game. Then came 1930, and Bobby Jones accomplished something that has never been duplicated. He won all four of the major championships that existed at the time: the US Open, the British Open, the US Amateur, and the British Amateur, all in the same year. This wasn't yet called the Grand Slam, that term would come later, but it was recognized immediately as an almost superhuman achievement. Jones won these four tournaments in the span of just 4 months, from June to September, playing under enormous pressure as the possibility of the sweep became apparent. When he won the final leg, the US Amateur at Marion, he was only 28 years old and at the absolute peak of his powers. And then, remarkably, he retired. Jones walked away from competitive golf, having achieved everything there was to achieve, and devoted himself to his law practice and to his dream of creating Augusta National. His retirement at such a young age, at the height of his fame and ability, only added to his legend. Between 1932 and 1933, Jones and the architect Alistair Mackenzie worked together to complete the design of Augusta National. The property they chose was a former nursery in Augusta, Georgia, a site with beautiful rolling terrain, mature trees, and a natural beauty that would provide the perfect canvas for their design. Mackenzie and Jones collaborated closely, with Jones providing insight from a champion player's perspective and Mackenzie supplying his design genius and experience. They created a course with wide fairways that encouraged aggressive play, with strategic bunkering that rewarded well-planned shots, with greens that were large and contoured to allow for numerous hole locations. The course they designed was unlike anything that existed at the time, less about punishment and more about rewarding excellence, less about brute difficulty and more about strategic interest. Mackenzie would die shortly after the course was completed, never seeing what Augusta National would become, but his design partnership with Jones produced a masterpiece. In 1934, the first Masters tournament was played at Augusta National. It wasn't called the Masters yet. Jones modestly insisted it be called the Augusta National Invitation Tournament, but the name would eventually change. Horton Smith won that first tournament, and while the field was relatively small and the event was new, It was clear from the beginning that this was something special. The course was beautiful and challenging, the organization was impeccable, and the vision behind it was to create the best tournament in golf, one that would bring together the greatest players in ideal conditions. The Masters would grow year by year, adding traditions and prestige, until it became one of golf's 4 modern major championships, a rite of spring that captivates golf fans around the world. Also in 1934, the Los Angeles Open was inaugurated, an event that would later become known as the Genesis Invitational. This tournament brought professional golf to the West Coast in a significant way, and it demonstrated that tournament golf could thrive in different parts of America, not just in the traditional golfing centers of the East and South. The Los Angeles Open would attract top players and enthusiastic galleries, and it helped establish California as a major force in American golf. The 1930s were complicated years for golf. The Great Depression had arrived, and the economic hardships slowed golf course construction dramatically. Many courses struggled financially, some closed, and the boom years of the 1920s came to an abrupt end. But interestingly, professional tournaments became even more important during the Depression years. People needed entertainment and distraction from their hardships, and watching great golfers compete provided that. Professional tournaments offered excitement, drama, and hope, a demonstration that excellence was still possible even in difficult times. Galleries came out to watch Hagen, Gene Sarazen, and other stars, finding in their skill and competition a welcome escape from the struggles of daily life during the Depression. In 1937, the United States achieved something that had never been done before when they won the Ryder Cup on British soil. The American team traveled to Southport and Ainsdale Golf Club and defeated the British team, proving that American golf had truly arrived on the world stage. Winning on British soil was particularly meaningful because it showed that American golfers could handle British conditions, the firm, fast links courses that were so different from American parkland layouts. This victory was another sign of American golf's growing strength and depth of talent. Then came 1939, and the world once again descended into war. World War II would prove even more devastating and disruptive than the First World War had been. From 1939 to 1945, many golf events were suspended. The Masters was not played from 1943 to 1945. The Open Championship was suspended for the duration of the war. Golf courses were repurposed for agricultural use, for military training, for any purpose that could contribute to the war effort. The Augusta National Grounds famously raised cattle and turkeys to support food production. Golf professionals and amateurs alike went off to serve in the military. Some would not return. The game went into another period of dormancy, waiting for peace, waiting for the world to put itself back together so that something as civilized and leisurely as golf could resume. These were dark years, years when golf seemed trivial compared to the immense struggles the world was facing. Years when the courses lay quiet and the tournaments went unplayed, and everyone simply hoped that when the war ended, golf would still be there, waiting to be taken up again. And through all of this, from Jones's grand vision to Hagen's showmanship, from the first Masters to the devastation of another world war, golf had shown both its resilience and its vulnerability. The game could inspire and entertain, could create moments of transcendent beauty and achievement, but it was also subject to the larger forces of history, to economic collapse and global conflict, reminding us that golf, for all its importance to those who love it, remains ultimately a game, a pastime that must yield to more serious matters when the world demands it. As peace returned to the world in 1945, golf emerged from its wartime hibernation, and what emerged that year was something extraordinary. Byron Nelson, a quiet and deeply religious Texan, embarked on a season that has never been matched and likely never will be. Nelson won 18 PGA Tour events in 1945, a staggering total that included 11 consecutive victories, 11 straight tournament wins, Think about that for a moment: the consistency required, the sustained excellence, the ability to hold off every challenger week after week after week. Nelson was playing golf at a level that seemed almost mechanical in its precision. Yet there was artistry in it too, a beautiful, repeatable swing and an unflappable temperament. Some have pointed out that many top players were still in military service during 1945, which is true, but Nelson's achievement remains remarkable regardless. He was playing against whoever showed up, and he was beating them with metronomic regularity. It was a performance that established Nelson as one of golf's all-time greats and set a standard for sustained excellence that still awes golfers today. In 1946, women's golf took a major step forward with the first U.S. Women's Open being played. This gave female golfers their own national championship, comparable to the men's U.S. Open, a tournament that would identify the best woman golfer in America. Patty Berg won that inaugural championship, and the U.S. Women's Open would go on to become one of the most prestigious events in women's golf, a major championship that attracted the best players and commanded serious attention. The establishment of this tournament was recognition that women's golf deserved its own pinnacle events, its own chances for players to prove themselves on the biggest stages. From 1947 to 1949, another figure was defining what modern golf could look like: Ben Hogan. Hogan had already been a successful professional, but in these years, and particularly after recovering from a near-fatal car accident in 1949, he reached a level of ball striking that became the gold standard for generations to come. Hogan was obsessive about the golf swing, about finding the perfect mechanics, about eliminating mistakes through practice and analysis. He would hit balls until his hands bled, searching for the secret, as he called it, the key to consistent, reliable ball striking. His major championship victories during this period, and especially those that would come in the early 1950s, were built on this foundation of incredible ball striking ability. Hogan made golf look like a science, something that could be perfected through study and work, and his approach influenced how countless golfers thought about the game. In 1950, women's professional golf organized itself with the founding of the LPGA, the Ladies Professional Golf Association. This gave female professionals their own tour, a circuit of tournaments where they could compete for prize money and build careers as professional golfers. The LPGA's founding members included some of the great names in women's golf: Patty Berg, Babe Zaharias, Louise Suggs, and others who had been competing in scattered events and exhibitions but now had a structured tour. The LPGA would grow into a major force in golf, creating opportunities for generations of women golfers and proving that women's professional golf could attract galleries, sponsors, and television coverage. In 1951, golf's rules were unified when the USGA and the R&A agreed on a single rules code that would govern the game worldwide. Well, mostly unified, they couldn't quite agree on the size of the golf ball, with the R&A maintaining a slightly smaller ball than the USGA required, but on virtually everything else they came together. This unification was important for a sport that was played internationally. It meant that the rules would be consistent whether you were playing in Scotland or California, that golfers could move between different countries and find the same game. The USGA and R&A would continue to jointly govern golf's rules, periodically reviewing and updating them, but always working together to maintain that essential unity. In 1953, Ben Hogan accomplished something that still resonates through golf history. He won 3 major championships in a single year: the Masters, the US Open, and the British Open. This was just 4 years after his horrific car accident that many thought would end his career. Hogan had to overcome terrible injuries, relearn how to walk properly, manage chronic pain, and somehow still play golf at the highest level. His 3 major victories in 1953 represented not just golfing excellence but human perseverance and determination. The British Open victory was particularly special because it was the only time Hogan played in that championship, and he traveled to Scotland, learned to play the firm, running links courses that were so different from what he knew, and won on his first try. Hogan's 1953 season solidified his legend and inspired everyone who faces adversity, showing what's possible when talent meets determination. Between 1954 and 1958, something revolutionary happened that would change golf forever. Television began providing coverage of major events, and the Masters in particular embraced this new medium. Television brought golf into people's living rooms, allowed them to watch the drama unfold in real time, to see the great players face crucial shots, to experience the tension and excitement of championship golf without being there in person. The audience for golf expanded dramatically. People who had never played golf, who lived nowhere near a golf course, could now watch and appreciate the game. Television turned golf into popular entertainment, not just a sport for participants, but a spectator sport that could captivate millions. In 1958, the Masters cemented its place in golf's pantheon with what became known as the back nine drama. The Masters had decided to televise only the back nine on the final day, and what viewers saw was riveting. Arnold Palmer, playing brilliantly, made a charge on those final holes in dramatic fashion. The condensed coverage, focusing on the climactic holes where tournaments are won and lost, created an intensity that captivated viewers. This format, this focus on the crucial closing holes, became a template for golf television and helped establish the Masters as must-see TV every April. The back nine at Augusta National became the most famous 9 holes in golf, and Sunday at the Masters became an annual tradition for golf fans. In 1960, Arnold Palmer won the U.S. Open at Cherry Hills in spectacular fashion, coming from 7 shots back on the final day by driving the first green and making birdie, then charging through the rest of the round. Palmer's aggressive, gopher-broke style and his magnetic personality attracted fans who became known as Arnie's Army, legions of devoted followers who marched around golf courses pulling for their hero. Palmer was perfect for the television age, charismatic, emotional, exciting to watch. He didn't just play golf, he attacked it, he showed visible emotion. He connected with galleries in a way that made people feel invested in his success. Arnie's Army represented a new kind of golf fandom, passionate and vocal, and Palmer's appeal helped grow golf's popularity enormously during the 1960s. In 1962, a young player arrived on the scene who would eventually surpass even Palmer's achievements. Jack Nicklaus, just 22 years old and freshly turned professional, won the U.S. Open at Oakmont, defeating Arnold Palmer himself in a playoff. Nicklaus was different from Palmer in almost every way. Where Palmer was slender and aggressive, Nicklaus was stocky and powerful. Where Palmer showed emotion, Nicklaus was stoic and analytical. Palmer's fans initially didn't care for this young challenger to their hero, but Nicklaus's talent was undeniable. His victory at Oakmont announced the arrival of someone who would dominate golf for the next 2 decades, who would rewrite the record books, who would become, in many people's estimation, the greatest golfer who ever lived. But in 1962, that was all in the future. For now, he was simply a talented young player who had just won his first major championship, beginning a journey that would transform golf history. And so golf had moved from Byron Nelson's wartime dominance through the establishment of women's professional golf, through Ben Hogan's quest for perfection, through the television revolution, and into a new era defined by charismatic stars like Palmer and emerging legends like Nicklaus. The game was growing, evolving, reaching new audiences, creating new heroes, writing new chapters in its endless story. As we drift further into the 1960s, we arrive at 1963, a year that marked a significant milestone in professional golf's economics. Arnold Palmer became the first golfer to earn over $100,000 in prize money in a single season. This might not sound like much by today's standards, when tournament winners routinely take home millions, but in 1963 it was a remarkable sum, evidence that professional golf was becoming genuinely lucrative. Palmer's earning power came not just from his tournament winnings, but from his appeal to sponsors and his ability to draw crowds. He was making golf profitable in ways it had never been before, showing that a charismatic champion could turn the game into serious business. This financial milestone represented golf's growth as a professional sport. Its transition from a game where even the best players needed second jobs to one where the top players could earn substantial livings purely from playing. Also in 1963, Mickey Wright was demonstrating absolute dominance on the LPGA Tour, winning 13 events in a single season. 13 victories. Wright was one of the greatest ball strikers the game has ever seen, male or female, with a swing that Ben Hogan himself praised as the best he'd ever seen. Her 13 wins in one season showed what sustained excellence looked like in women's golf, and it established Wright as one of the LPGA's all-time greats. She was clinical in her precision, relentless in her consistency, and her success helped legitimize the LPGA and demonstrate that women's professional golf could produce champions of extraordinary ability. From 1964 to 1967, professional tour schedules and purses continued to grow in the United States. More tournaments were being added to the schedule, more sponsors were getting involved, and the total prize money available was increasing year by year. This growth created more opportunities for professional golfers to make a living, which in turn attracted more talented players to turn professional. The tour was becoming more structured, more organized, more professional in every sense. What had been a somewhat haphazard collection of tournaments was becoming a proper circuit, a year-round series of events that gave players consistent competition and income. This professionalization of the tour schedule was essential to golf's continued growth as a spectator sport. In 1967, international television coverage expanded significantly, connecting global audiences to major championships in new ways. Golf was becoming a truly international television event, with the majors being broadcast not just in the United States and Britain but around the world. This meant that a spectacular shot or a dramatic finish could be witnessed simultaneously by millions of people across different continents. The global reach of televised golf helped create international stars, allowed fans everywhere to follow the same tournaments and players, and contributed to golf's growing popularity worldwide. The shared experience of watching major championships was bringing golf fans together across borders and oceans. In 1968, the structure of professional golf in America underwent a significant reorganization. Tournament professionals decided to form a separate organization that would eventually become the modern PGA Tour, distinct from the PGA of America, which primarily represented club professionals. This split recognized that tournament professionals and club professionals had different interests and needs. Tournament players needed an organization focused on running tournaments, negotiating television contracts, attracting sponsors, and growing prize money. Club professionals needed an organization focused on teaching, club management, and the business of running golf facilities. The formation of what became the PGA Tour allowed tournament golf to be managed by people whose sole focus was making competitive golf the best it could be, and this organizational change would prove crucial to the tour's continued growth and success. In 1969, something happened at the Ryder Cup that would be remembered forever, not for its competitiveness but for its sportsmanship. The matches at Royal Birkdale came down to the final match between Jack Nicklaus and Tony Jacklin, with the overall result depending on this one match. On the final hole, Jacklin faced a short putt that, if he missed, would give the United States victory. It was a missable putt, short but not a tap-in, the kind of putt that carries enormous pressure. Nicklaus walked over and conceded the putt to Jacqueline, ensuring the overall match ended in a tie rather than an American victory. This gesture, which became known simply as the concession, was controversial to some who thought Nicklaus should have made Jacqueline putt under pressure, but it exemplified the spirit of sportsmanship that the Ryder Cup was meant to embody. Nicklaus later said he didn't think Jacqueline would miss, but more importantly, he didn't want to win that way. The concession became one of golf's most celebrated moments, a reminder that how you play the game matters as much as whether you win. Also in 1969, golf equipment took another evolutionary leap with the invention of graphite shafts. Graphite was lighter than steel, which allowed club designers to create clubs with different weight distributions and swing characteristics. The technology would take time to mature. Early graphite shafts had reliability issues, but the potential was clear. Lighter shafts could help players generate more clubhead speed, and the vibration dampening properties of graphite made clubs feel better. Eventually, graphite would become the standard material for driver shafts and would find its way into other clubs as well, particularly for players seeking more distance or those who needed help with vibration. Between 1971 and 1973, iron design was undergoing its own revolution with cast irons and perimeter weighting gaining traction. Traditional irons were forged from soft steel, shaped by hammering hot metal, and they had relatively small sweet spots. Cast irons used a different manufacturing process, pouring molten metal into molds, which allowed for more complex designs. Perimeter weighting meant putting weight around the edges of the club head rather than concentrating it in the center, which made the clubs more forgiving on off-center hits. These innovations made golf easier for average players, giving them clubs that didn't punish small mistakes as severely. Purists sometimes complained that the new clubs were making the game too easy, but for the vast majority of golfers, clubs that helped them hit better shots were welcome improvements. In 1974, golf's history and heritage were given a permanent home when the World Golf Hall of Fame opened in Pinehurst, North Carolina. This institution would preserve the game's history, honor its greatest champions, and serve as a repository for golf's memories and artifacts. The Hall of Fame recognized that golf had accumulated a rich history worth preserving, and it gave that history a physical location where fans could come and connect with the game's past. Inductees into the Hall of Fame would represent the game's elite, those who had made the most significant contributions to golf as players, administrators, or ambassadors of the game. From 1976 to 1978, a young Spanish golfer was emerging who would transform European golf. Seve Ballesteros was unlike anyone European golf had seen before. He was dashing and charismatic, aggressive and creative, capable of spectacular recovery shots and bold play that thrilled galleries. Ballesteros' rise boosted the European Tour's profile significantly. He gave European golf a star who could compete with the Americans, someone who played with flair and imagination, who made golf exciting to watch. His success inspired a generation of European golfers and helped establish the European Tour as a major force in world golf. Ballesteros was showing that European golf could produce champions who didn't just compete with the Americans but could beat them, and his impact on European golf's confidence and popularity cannot be overstated. And so the 1960s and 1970s had seen golf continue its transformation, from Palmer's financial breakthrough to Wright's dominance, from organizational restructuring to equipment innovation, from moments of sportsmanship to the rise of new international stars. The game was spreading its influence, improving its technology, honoring its history, and preparing for what would come next in its ongoing evolution. As we enter the 1980s, we find the European Tour expanding and establishing itself more firmly on the world golf stage. In 1980, the European Tour was increasing the number of co-sanctioned events, tournaments that counted on both the European and other tours, which helped strengthen connections between different parts of the golf world. This expansion meant more opportunities for European professionals, larger prize funds, and better organization. The European Tour was no longer just a minor regional circuit but a legitimate rival to the American Tour, with its own stars, its own character, and its own importance in the golf landscape. The growth of the European Tour created a more balanced, truly international professional golf ecosystem. During the 1980s, golf equipment underwent perhaps its most dramatic transformation since the gut-tie ball replaced the feathery. Metal woods and graphite shafts became mainstream, fundamentally changing what golfers carried in their bags. Metal woods, particularly drivers, were more forgiving than traditional wooden clubs and could be manufactured with thinner faces that created more spring effect and distance. The term woods became something of a misnomer since these clubs were made of steel or titanium, but the name stuck. Graphite shafts, which had been invented in 1969 but had taken time to become reliable and affordable, were now finding their way into more golfers' bags, offering lighter weight and better vibration dampening. These technologies made golf equipment more forgiving and helped players hit the ball farther with less perfect technique. The game was becoming more accessible to average players while also giving elite players new ways to gain distance. In 1986, Jack Nicklaus provided one of sport's most memorable moments when he won the Masters at age 46. Nicklaus hadn't won a major championship in 6 years and wasn't expected to contend, but on Sunday at Augusta National, he put together a back nine for the ages, shooting 30 on those final 9 holes to win his 6th green jacket and his 18th major championship. It was a triumph of experience over youth, of will over physical decline, of sheer competitive fire. Nicklaus's victory reminded everyone why he was called the Golden Bear, why he was considered the greatest champion golf had ever known. The roars from the Augusta galleries that Sunday were among the loudest ever heard there, as fans recognized they were witnessing something special, perhaps the last hurrah of the game's greatest player. In 1987, European golf achieved a breakthrough that had seemed impossible just years earlier. The European team won the Ryder Cup on American soil for the first time, defeating the United States at Muirfield Village, ironically a course designed by Jack Nicklaus. This victory was hugely significant for European golf's confidence and standing. Winning the Ryder Cup in Britain was one thing, but winning in America on an American course designed by an American legend proved that European golf had truly arrived as an equal to American golf. The victory was fueled by the talented generation of European players that Seve Ballesteros had helped inspire, players like Nick Faldo, Ian Woosnam, Bernhard Langer, and Sandy Lyle. European golf was no longer looking up to American golf. They were equals, competitors, rivals who could win anywhere. In 1990, accessibility became an important consideration in golf course design, with measures like the Americans with Disabilities Act supporting more inclusive course design. Golf was recognizing that the game should be available to everyone, including those with disabilities. This meant thinking about course design differently, ensuring that people with mobility limitations could navigate courses, that facilities were accessible, that golf could be enjoyed by the widest possible range of people. These accessibility measures represented golf's evolution toward greater inclusivity, an acknowledgement that the game belonged to everyone who wanted to play it, regardless of physical limitations. In 1994, international amateur golf took a step forward with the World Amateur Golf Council, which would later become the International Golf Federation, advancing global amateur competition. This organization worked to promote amateur golf worldwide, to organize international competitions, and to support the development of golf in countries where the game was still growing. The recognition that amateur golf needed its own international governing structure showed how global the game had become, how many countries now had active amateur golf programs, and how important it was to maintain connections and competitions across borders. Then, in 1995, something launched that would change how golf fans consumed the sport. The Golf Channel began broadcasting, offering 24 hours of golf coverage every single day. For the first time, golf fans had a dedicated channel that showed tournaments, instruction, history, and golf-related programming around the clock. This was a bold bet that there was enough interest in golf to sustain a full-time channel, and that bet proved correct. The Golf Channel gave fans unprecedented access to the game, allowed them to watch tournaments from around the world, and helped grow golf's audience by making it constantly available. Golf was no longer something you could only watch during the major championships. It was there whenever you wanted it. In 1997, the golf world was turned upside down when a 21-year-old named Tiger Woods won the Masters by 12 shots. 12 shots. That's not just winning a major championship, that's dominating it in a way that had rarely been seen. Tiger had turned professional just the year before and had already shown flashes of brilliance. But this performance at Augusta National was something else entirely. He was longer off the tee than anyone, his iron play was surgical, his short game was brilliant, and his mental toughness was absolute. Tiger was also the first golfer of African and Asian descent to win the Masters, breaking a significant color barrier at a tournament played at a club that had historically excluded minorities. His victory was culturally significant and athletically dominant, and it announced that golf had a new superstar who might reshape the entire sport. By 2000, Tiger Woods was completely dominating professional golf. He won 3 major championships that year: the US Open at Pebble Beach by a staggering 15 shots, the British Open at St. Andrews, and the PGA Championship. He was number 1 in the world rankings by an enormous margin, and he was making the best players in the world look ordinary by comparison. Tiger's combination of power, precision, mental strength, and competitive fire was unlike anything golf had seen. He was hitting shots that other players couldn't hit, winning by margins that seemed impossible, and doing it all with a fierce intensity that sometimes bordered on intimidating. Golf had seen great champions before, but Tiger was operating on a different level, redefining what was possible in the sport. Then, in 2001, Tiger accomplished something that hadn't been done in the modern era. He won the Masters, which meant he held all 4 professional major championships at the same time. He had won the US Open, British Open, and PGA Championship in 2000, and now with the 2001 Masters victory, he held all 4 major trophies simultaneously. This became known as the Tiger Slam, and while it wasn't a calendar year Grand Slam since the victories spanned 2 years, it was still an extraordinary achievement. Tiger was the only player holding all 4 majors at once, and this feat demonstrated his complete dominance of the game. For a period in the early 2000s, Tiger Woods was as dominant in golf as any athlete has been in any sport, and his success brought millions of new fans to golf, changed how the game was played, and inspired a generation of young golfers who wanted to emulate his power and his success. And so golf had moved through the expansion of European golf, through equipment revolutions and aging champions' triumphs, through moves toward inclusivity and new media platforms, and into the era of Tiger Woods, an era that would reshape golf in fundamental ways and create a level of public interest in the sport that exceeded anything that had come before. As we drift into the early 2000s, professional golf was organizing itself in new ways, with the World Golf Championship Series consolidating elite global events. These tournaments brought together the best players from different tours around the world, creating truly international fields that competed for substantial prize money and world ranking points. The WGC events filled a gap between regular tour events and major championships, giving the world's best players more opportunities to compete against each other in prestigious settings. This consolidation helped create a more coherent global professional golf calendar, where the top players faced each other regularly rather than just at the 4 majors. In 2003, something unprecedented happened when Annika Sorenstam, the dominant player in women's golf at the time, accepted a sponsor's exemption to play in the PGA Tour's Colonial Tournament in Texas. A woman was competing in a regular PGA Tour event against the men, something that hadn't happened in modern times. The attention was enormous, the pressure immense, and the debate fierce about whether this was a publicity stunt or a legitimate athletic challenge. Sorenstam played solidly but missed the cut, shooting rounds that would have been competitive on the LPGA Tour but weren't quite enough against the men. Regardless of the outcome, her participation was significant, a statement that gender barriers in golf could be challenged, and a demonstration of the skill and courage required to compete at the highest levels. It sparked conversations about women's golf, about equality in sports, and about what competitive barriers should or shouldn't exist. From 2004 to 2008, golf equipment fitting entered a new era with launch monitors and custom-fit equipment becoming standard practice, at least for serious golfers. Launch monitors were devices that could measure exactly what happened when a club struck a ball, the ball speed, launch angle, spin rate, and numerous other data points. This technology allowed fitters to precisely match equipment to individual golfers' swings, optimizing their clubs for maximum performance. Custom fitting transformed from an art based on experience and feel into a science based on data and measurement. Golfers could now know with certainty which shaft flex, club length, lie angle, and loft would produce the best results for their particular swing. This represented another step in golf's ongoing relationship with technology, using data and analysis to help players perform better. In 2009, the R&A and USGA recognized that golf balls and clubs were allowing players to hit the ball farther and farther, which was creating problems for golf courses that were becoming obsolete and for the game's traditional challenge. They began joint distance research projects to study the issue and consider whether equipment regulations needed to be tightened. This research would continue for years, examining every aspect of distance, equipment technology, player athleticism, course setup, and the overall impact of increased distance on the game. The distance debate would become one of golf's most contentious ongoing issues, with equipment manufacturers, professional players, course designers, and governing bodies all having different perspectives on whether distance was a problem and what, if anything, should be done about it. In 2010, new groove rules were implemented that changed wedge spin characteristics. The new rules required sharper, narrower grooves on wedges, which reduced the amount of spin players could generate from rough. This was intended to restore some of the premium on accuracy, making it more costly to miss fairways with approach shots. The rule change affected professional and elite amateur golf significantly, requiring players to adjust their strategies and techniques around the greens. It was an example of the governing bodies using equipment regulations to try to maintain what they saw as proper balance in the game's challenge. In 2016, golf achieved something it had been working toward for over a century. The sport returned to the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro after a 112-year absence. Golf had last been played in the Olympics in 1904, and its return was seen as an important milestone for the sport's global recognition and development. The Olympic golf tournaments featured both men's and women's competitions, with players from around the world competing for medals representing their countries. While some top players chose not to participate, citing various concerns, the Olympic golf tournament was generally considered successful and helped raise golf's profile in countries where the sport was still developing. Golf was back in the Olympic family, and the hope was that this would support the game's growth worldwide. In 2018 and 2019, the rules of golf underwent their most significant modernization in decades, with changes taking effect that were designed to make the rules easier to understand and the game faster to play. The modernized rules included changes like being able to leave the flagstick in while putting, new dropping procedures, reduced penalties for various infractions, and simplified language throughout. These changes recognized that golf's rules had become unnecessarily complex and that simplification would benefit everyone who played the game. The modernized rules represented a willingness by the governing bodies to evolve with the times, to make golf more accessible and less intimidating for new players while still maintaining the game's essential character and challenges. Then 2020 arrived, and with it came the COVID-19 pandemic that disrupted life around the world. Golf was not immune. Tours were interrupted, major championships were postponed or played without spectators, and the normal rhythm of professional golf was thrown into chaos. The Masters, usually played in April, was moved to November. The Open Championship was cancelled entirely for the first time since World War II. But interestingly, while professional golf was disrupted, recreational golf actually saw a boom. People stuck at home, looking for safe outdoor activities, turned to golf. Courses were often crowded with both returning players and complete beginners discovering the game. Social distancing was easy on a golf course, fresh air was abundant, and the game provided a welcome escape from pandemic stress. Golf saw increased participation that continued even as pandemic restrictions eased, suggesting that the game had attracted a new generation of players who might stick with it. By 2021, the distance debate had intensified, with distance-driven strategies dominating professional golf and raising questions about equipment regulation. Players were hitting the ball so far that many classic courses were no longer providing adequate challenge at the professional level. The game's governing bodies were under pressure to act, but any significant equipment restrictions would face resistance from manufacturers and players who had built their games around modern equipment. The debate touched on fundamental questions about what golf should be, whether technology should continue to push distance or whether limits should be imposed to preserve the game's traditional character and challenges. From 2023 to 2025, professional golf underwent perhaps its most dramatic restructuring in decades as rival tours and new agreements reshaped the economics and governance of elite professional golf. A new tour backed by significant funding challenged the established tours, creating controversy and division in the professional game. Eventually, agreements and negotiations led to new structures for how professional golf would be organized and governed at the highest levels. The specifics were complex and still evolving, but the fundamental reality was that professional golf's economic model and competitive structure were being reimagined for a new era. These changes would affect everything from how tournaments were organized to how players chose their schedules to how golf fans consumed the sport. And so we arrive at the present day, or near enough to it, with golf having traveled an extraordinary journey from those early stick and ball games in medieval Europe to a global sport worth billions of dollars, played by millions of people, broadcast to hundreds of millions more, governed by detailed rules, played with technologically sophisticated equipment, and constantly evolving to meet new challenges and opportunities. Golf has shown remarkable continuity. The basic challenge of hitting a ball into a hole remains unchanged, but also remarkable adaptability, changing with the times while maintaining its essential character. The story of golf continues, new chapters being written with every tournament, every round, every swing, carrying forward a tradition that stretches back centuries while reaching toward a future full of possibility. And so we've traveled through golf's long history, from medieval Scotland to the modern era, watching the game evolve and grow, change and adapt, always moving forward while carrying its past with it. But history isn't just a sequence of dates and developments. History lives in places, in the courses where the game has been played, where memories have been made, where the greatest moments have unfolded. And history lives in the competitions themselves, in the rivalries that have defined eras, in the matches that captured imaginations and created legends. Let's slow down now. Let's visit some of these sacred places where golf has been played for generations, where the ground itself seems to remember every shot that's ever been struck. And then we'll revisit some of those moments when individual brilliance or fierce competition created stories that transcend the game itself, stories that become part of golf's eternal narrative. These aren't just facts and dates anymore. These are the places and moments that make golf more than a game, that give it soul and memory and meaning. Legendary courses, St. Andrews Old Course. We begin, as we must, at St. Andrews, at the Old Course, the home of golf. This isn't just the oldest golf course still in play, though it is that. This is the course that defined what golf could be, that established the rhythms and challenges that every golf course since has tried to emulate or respond to. The Old Course sits beside the North Sea on the east coast of Scotland, windswept and ancient, its contours shaped by centuries of play and weather. What makes the Old Course so special isn't perfection in the conventional sense. There are blind shots, strange bounces, quirks and oddities that would never be included in a modern design. The famous road hole, the 17th, has a blind tee shot over an old stone building and a green that sits perilously close to an actual road and a stone wall. The green complexes are enormous, some of them shared between holes going out and holes coming back, creating double greens that can be over an acre in size. There are bunkers with names and personalities like the Road Hole Bunker and Hell Bunker, deep pits that can destroy a score in moments. But the Old Course works. It flows. It challenges in ways that are subtle and profound. The firmness of the turf means the ball runs and bounces in ways that reward creativity and local knowledge. The wind changes everything, making the course play entirely differently from one day to the next. And there's a patience to it, a sense that this course has seen everything, every type of player, every kind of weather, every emotion golf can produce, and it endures, unchanged in its essentials, eternal. Walking the Old Course is walking through golf history. Bobby Jones played here and fell in love with it after initially hating it. Jack Nicklaus won his first Open here in 1970 and his last competitive major here with the Senior Open. Tiger Woods has won here. Generations of champions have tested themselves on this ground. And on most days, ordinary golfers can play the same holes, face the same challenges, experience the same course that the legends have played. There's something deeply democratic about that, something that connects the amateur hacker to the greatest champions through shared experience on shared ground. Augusta National. If St. Andrews represents golf's ancient past, Augusta National represents golf's capacity for perfection through design and maintenance. Created by Bobby Jones and Alistair Mackenzie in the early 1930s on the grounds of a former nursery in Georgia, Augusta National was built to be beautiful and challenging in equal measure, a course that would test the best players in the world while remaining playable and enjoyable for the members. The beauty of Augusta is almost overwhelming. The azaleas and dogwoods that bloom in early spring, the massive pine trees, the perfectly manicured fairways and greens, the way the course is presented each April for the Masters creates an image of golf as an aesthetic experience as much as an athletic one. Television loves Augusta National, and Augusta National seems designed to be loved by television, with its vibrant colors and dramatic landscapes. But beneath the beauty is a golf course of remarkable strategic depth. The wide fairways seem generous until you realize that being on the wrong side of the fairway makes the approach shot enormously more difficult. The greens are large but feature slopes and contours that create relatively small areas where pins can be placed. And the green speeds during Masters Week turn these surfaces into tests of nerves as much as skill. The par fives are all reachable for modern professionals, creating risk-reward decisions throughout the round. Specific holes have become iconic. The par 3 12th, with Rays Creek fronting the green and swirling winds making club selection nearly impossible. The par 5 13th, where players must decide whether to go for the green in 2 with Rays Creek waiting to swallow a slightly mishit shot. The par 5 15th, with water fronting a shallow green, creating one of golf's great risk-reward moments. And Amen Corner, that stretch from the 11th through the 13th where Masters are won and lost, where the pressure and the challenge combine to create drama year after year. Augusta National is changed and lengthened regularly to try to maintain its challenge against modern equipment and modern athletes. But the bones of the Mackenzie and Jones design remain, and the course continues to produce exciting golf and dramatic finishes, continuing to justify Jones's vision of creating a course that would host the best tournament in golf. Pebble Beach. On the California coast, where the land meets the Pacific Ocean in dramatic fashion, sits Pebble Beach Golf Links, perhaps the most beautiful golf course in the world. The course was designed by Jack Neville and Douglas Grant and opened in 1919, and it has been captivating golfers ever since with its stunning oceanside holes and its unique combination of beauty and challenge. The front nine at Pebble Beach moves inland and is good without being exceptional, but the back nine, especially holes 6 through 10 and then 17 and 18, are as spectacular as golf gets. The seventh hole is a short par 3 perched on a cliff edge with the ocean crashing below. The eighth is a par 4 that climbs uphill with a chasm of ocean to the right. The ninth and 10th play along the cliffs with the Pacific providing both stunning views and potential disaster for wayward shots. But it's the finishing holes that make Pebble Beach legendary. The 17th is a par 3 playing over an inlet of ocean to a small green surrounded by rocks and water. It's one of golf's most photographed holes, and in competition it's terrifying, a short hole where anything can happen. The 18th is a par 5 that hugs the ocean all the way, with the waves crashing against the rocks on the left and the fairway bending around the coastline. It's one of golf's great finishing holes, dramatic and demanding, with the ocean in play and the tournament often on the line. Pebble Beach is a public course, one of the few truly great courses where anyone can play if they're willing to pay the green fee. It hosts the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am each year and has hosted multiple U.S. Opens, each producing memorable moments. Jack Nicklaus's miraculous one-iron that hit the flagstick on 17 in 1972. Tom Watson's chip-in on 17 to beat Nicklaus in 1982. Tiger Woods' dominant victory in 2000. The course has been the stage for some of golf's greatest theater. Pine Valley, hidden away in the pine forests of southern New Jersey, accessible only to members and their guests, is Pine Valley, a course that many architects and players consider the finest golf course in the world. Designed by George Crump and completed in 1918, Pine Valley is golf in its most pure and demanding form, a course that punishes mistakes severely while rewarding excellent shots with fair results. Pine Valley is a course of extremes. The fairways and greens are immaculate, perfectly maintained islands of manicured turf. Everything else is wilderness, sandy waste areas, scrub, trees, and natural vegetation that swallows golf balls and ends hopes. There is no rough in the traditional sense. You're either on the closely mown areas or you're in trouble, often severe trouble. The course demands accuracy and nerve. Many holes require carries over waste areas from the tee, and the margins for error are small. The greens are relatively small and heavily contoured, and missing them means facing difficult recovery shots from challenging lies. There is no easy hole at Pine Valley, no place to relax, no room for complacency. The course demands your best golf from the first shot to the last. Pine Valley has never hosted professional tournaments and likely never will. It exists for its members and their guests, a private sanctuary where golf is played in its most challenging form. Those who have played it speak of it with a mixture of admiration and terror, awed by its beauty and difficulty in equal measure. It represents a particular philosophy of golf course design, one that emphasizes challenge and demands excellence, that makes no concessions to the average player but rewards the skilled player who can meet its demands. Royal County Down. In Northern Ireland, in the shadow of the Mourne Mountains, sits Royal County Down, a links course of breathtaking beauty and formidable challenge. The course was designed by Old Tom Morris in 1889 and has been refined over the decades into what many consider the finest links course outside of Scotland. Royal County Down features blind shots, undulating fairways, towering dunes covered in golden gorse, and greens that nestle into the natural landscape. The first 9 holes run out along Dundrum Bay with the mountains of Mourne providing a stunning backdrop, while the back 9 turns inland through dunes and valleys. The course is visually stunning, with the purple heather and yellow gorse creating a tapestry of color against the green fairways and the blue sky. But Royal County Down is not just beautiful. It's difficult, demanding, and sometimes frustrating. Many tee shots are blind, requiring players to aim at markers on the horizon and trust their lines. The rough is thick and punishing. The greens are well protected by deep bunkers and severe slopes. The wind, which blows frequently and strongly, can turn the course into an entirely different test from one day to the next. Royal County Down has hosted relatively few professional events, partly because of its remote location in Northern Ireland, but those who have played it in competition speak of it with enormous respect. It's a course that demands local knowledge, that rewards patience and punishes aggression, that provides a pure links golf experience in one of the most beautiful settings in golf. Great matches and rivalries. Palmer versus Nicklaus. The rivalry between Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus defined golf in the 1960s and helped grow the game's popularity during the early television era. Palmer was the established star when Nicklaus arrived, the charismatic hero with his gopher-broke style and his devoted army of fans. Nicklaus was the young challenger, the powerful, analytical player who seemed destined for greatness. Their first major confrontation came at the 1962 U.S. Open at Oakmont, where Nicklaus, in just his first year as a professional, defeated Palmer in an 18-hole playoff. The galleries at Oakmont were firmly on Palmer's side, hostile to this young interloper who was challenging their hero in his home state of Pennsylvania. But Nicklaus held his nerve and won, beginning a rivalry that would last for years. What made this rivalry special was the contrast in styles and personalities. Palmer attacked the course, taking risks, showing emotion, connecting with fans. Nicklaus was more conservative, more analytical, seemingly immune to pressure. Palmer was slender and athletic. Nicklaus was stocky and powerful. Palmer had matinee idol good looks. Nicklaus was nicknamed Fat Jack early in his career. They represented different approaches to golf and different personas. As the 1960s progressed, Nicklaus's superiority became clear. He won major after major, accumulating championships while Palmer's victories became less frequent. But even as Nicklaus established himself as the game's dominant player, Palmer remained its most popular, his army of fans never abandoning him. The two developed a genuine friendship even as they competed, a mutual respect that transcended their rivalry. Their matchups weren't always in direct competition. Sometimes it was Nicklaus winning while Palmer contended. Sometimes it was Palmer making a charge while Nicklaus faltered. But throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s, these two were the central figures in golf, and their rivalry helped make the game compelling television and brought millions of new fans to golf. Watson versus Nicklaus. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Jack Nicklaus had established himself as the greatest champion golf had ever known, but a new challenger had emerged in Tom Watson. Watson was a Stanford graduate with a beautiful swing and fierce competitive fire, and he proved to be Nicklaus's match in several memorable confrontations. Their rivalry produced two of the most famous moments in golf history, both at the British Open. In 1977 at Turnberry, Watson and Nicklaus played the final 2 rounds together, both pulling away from the field and engaging in a private duel. They traded birdies and brilliant shots over 36 holes of remarkable golf. On the 72nd hole, Watson hit a magnificent approach to a few feet and made the putt for a birdie that gave him a one-shot victory. Nicklaus had shot 65 to 66 on the weekend and lost. The golf both players produced over those 2 days is still considered some of the finest ever played under pressure. 5 years later, at Pebble Beach in the 1982 U.S. Open, they met again in contention. Nicklaus was in the clubhouse, having finished his round with a score that looked like it might win. Watson was on the 17th hole, that terrifying par 3 over the ocean, and he had knocked his tee shot into thick rough to the left of the green. His caddy, Bruce Edwards, told him to get it close. Watson said, "I'm not going to get it close, I'm going to make it." And he did, chipping in for birdie, then birdieing the 18th for good measure to win by 2 shots. The chip at 17 became one of golf's most replayed moments. Watson's celebration with his fist pump and embrace of his caddy capturing pure joy and competitive triumph. Watson and Nicklaus brought out the best in each other. Nicklaus, even in his late 30s and early 40s, raised his game when competing against Watson. Watson, for his part, seemed to thrive on the challenge of facing the game's greatest champion. Their rivalry was marked by mutual respect and exceptional golf, and it provided some of the most dramatic moments in major championship history. Norman's near misses. Sometimes a rivalry isn't against a single opponent but against fate itself, and no golfer embodied this quite like Greg Norman. The Australian known as the Great White Shark was one of the most talented golfers of his generation, possessing enormous power, a beautiful swing, and aggressive instincts that made him exciting to watch. But Norman also experienced heartbreak in major championships in ways that seemed almost cruelly consistent. Norman lost majors in nearly every way imaginable. In 1986, he led all 4 majors at some point during the final round but won only the British Open. At the PGA Championship that year, Bob Tway holed a bunker shot on the 72nd hole to beat him. In 1987 at the Masters, Larry Mize holed an impossible chip from off the green on the second playoff hole to defeat him. At the 1989 British Open, Mark Calcavecchia beat him in a playoff. In 1993 at the PGA Championship, Paul Azinger beat him in a playoff. But the most devastating loss came at the 1996 Masters. Norman led by 6 shots going into the final round, and it seemed impossible that he could lose. But playing with Nick Faldo, Norman shot 78 while Faldo shot 67, and Norman lost by 5 shots, a swing of 11 strokes. Norman's collapse was complete and public, broadcast to millions, and the image of Faldo embracing Norman after winning, comforting him in his moment of devastation, became one of golf's most poignant moments. Norman won 2 majors in his career, but he finished second in majors 8 times, and he lost in ways that seemed to defy probability. Yet through it all, Norman maintained his aggressive style, his willingness to take risks, his refusal to play it safe even when safety might have served him better. He became, in a way, golf's greatest tragic figure, enormously talented and yet somehow star-crossed, brilliant but often just short of triumph. Tiger versus the field. When Tiger Woods reached his peak in the early 2000s, his rivalry wasn't really with any individual player but with everyone. Tiger was so dominant, so superior to his competition, that tournaments became less about who would win and more about whether anyone could stay close to Tiger. From 1999 to 2002, Tiger won 7 major championships and numerous other tournaments. His margins of victory were often absurd. 15 shots at the US Open, 12 shots at the Masters, 8 shots at the British Open. He was hitting shots other players couldn't hit, making putts that others missed, and doing it all with a mental toughness that made him virtually unbeatable when he had the lead going into Sunday. The effect Tiger had on his competition was psychological as much as athletic. Players knew that if Tiger was in contention, they needed to play their absolute best just to have a chance. Several players spoke about the intimidation factor, about seeing Tiger's name on the leaderboard and feeling like they needed to be perfect. Tiger didn't just beat his competitors. He dominated them mentally and physically. Individual players had moments of success against Tiger. Ernie Els won majors during the Tiger era. Phil Mickelson had his breakthrough at the 2004 Masters. Vijay Singh had a stretch where he challenged Tiger's #1 ranking. But no one could sustain excellence against Tiger the way he sustained it against them. Tiger's rivalry with the field was one-sided for much of his prime, and it took injuries and personal struggles to finally slow him down and give others a chance to claim their places at the top of the game. Mickelson versus Woods. While no individual player could match Tiger Woods' sustained excellence, Phil Mickelson became his most consistent rival and his opposite in almost every way. Where Tiger was controlled and precise, Mickelson was daring and creative. Where Tiger hit the ball straight and managed the course, Mickelson shaped shots and took risks. Where Tiger was stoic, Mickelson was emotional and expressive. Their rivalry never quite reached the intensity of Palmer-Nicklaus or Watson-Nicklaus because Tiger was simply better, winning 14 majors during the period when they overlapped in their primes, while Mickelson won 5. But Mickelson provided the most consistent challenge to Tiger, and their head-to-head matchups were always compelling because of their contrasting styles. The rivalry had its defining moment at the 2001 Masters, where Tiger held off Mickelson's charge to complete the Tiger Slam. But Mickelson had his triumphs too, particularly at the 2004 Masters where he finally won his first major championship, breaking through after years of being considered the best player never to have won a major. What made the Mickelson-Woods rivalry endure was that even as Tiger dominated, Mickelson never seemed intimidated. He played his own game, took his chances, and occasionally pulled off victories that seemed impossible. And as Tiger's dominance waned due to injuries and personal issues in the late 2000s and 2010s, Mickelson continued playing at a high level, eventually becoming the oldest major champion when he won the 2021 PGA Championship at age 50. Their rivalry represented different philosophies of golf, different approaches to the game, and different personalities, and that contrast made their competitions compelling even when the outcomes seemed predetermined. And so these places and these rivalries form the texture of golf's story, the specific grounds where the game has been played and the specific competitions that have defined eras. Golf exists in abstract as a set of rules and challenges, but it lives in these particular places, in these specific moments when great players faced each other or faced their own limitations or faced courses that tested everything they had. These are the stories that get passed down, the memories that endure, the moments that make golf more than just hitting a ball into a hole, but rather a human drama played out on beautiful and challenging ground. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, though golf's story continues without us, still being written with every tournament, every round, every swing. Let's take a moment to reflect on where we've been, and then look ahead to where golf might be going. We started in medieval Europe, watching people play simple stick and ball games across the countryside. We saw golf take root in Scotland, developing on the coastal links where the sandy soil and natural contours created the perfect canvas for the game. We watched as Scottish kings banned it, then embraced it, then made it their own. We followed golf spread across Britain, then across the Atlantic to America, then around the entire world. We saw the game organize itself, creating clubs and championships, writing rules and establishing traditions. We watched as the equipment evolved, from feathery balls stuffed with goose down to modern multi-layer designs engineered in laboratories, from wooden clubs with hickory shafts to metal woods with graphite shafts and adjustable weights. We met the champions who defined their eras, Old Tom and Young Tom Morris in the early days of the Open Championship, Bobby Jones and his Grand Slam, then his retirement to create Augusta National, Ben Hogan rebuilding himself after a devastating accident to reach perfection in ball striking, Arnold Palmer bringing charisma and emotion to the television age, Jack Nicklaus accumulating 18 major championships and becoming the standard by which all others are measured, Tiger Woods dominating the game so completely that he seemed to be playing a different sport than everyone else. We saw how women fought for their place in golf, forming their own organizations, creating their own tours, producing their own champions. We watched as technology changed the game, as television brought it to millions, as equipment advances pushed distances ever farther and sparked debates about what golf should be. We visited the sacred grounds where golf is played at its highest level. St. Andrews with its ancient authenticity, and its connection to golf's origins. Augusta National with its beauty and its strategic brilliance. Pebble Beach where the Pacific Ocean creates drama and danger. Pine Valley with its uncompromising difficulty. Royal County Down with its stunning beauty in the shadow of the mountains. And we revisited the great rivalries and moments. Palmer and Nicklaus representing different eras and different styles meeting in competition. Watson and Nicklaus producing golf of extraordinary quality in their duels. Norman's heartbreaks and near misses. Tiger's period of complete dominance. The different personalities and approaches that have made golf's competitions compelling across the generations. All of this history, all of these stories, all of these places and moments, they're part of golf's continuing narrative. And the story goes on. Looking ahead, golf faces questions and challenges. How will the professional game organize itself as economics and competing interests reshape the tour structure? How will the governing bodies balance tradition with the need to keep the game relevant and accessible? What will be done, if anything, about the distance that modern equipment enables, and how will classic courses adapt or be preserved? How will golf continue to grow globally, reaching new populations and new countries? How will technology continue to change both how golf is played and how it's consumed by fans? But alongside these challenges are opportunities. Golf continues to attract new players, people discovering the game's unique combination of outdoor exercise, social interaction, personal challenge, and connection to nature and history. The game that began on Scottish links is now played on 6 continents, in climates and landscapes the early Scots could never have imagined. Municipal courses and public facilities continue to make the game accessible to those who can't afford private club memberships. Junior programs introduce young people to golf, creating the next generation of players and fans. Golf has proven remarkably resilient over its long history. It survived wars and depressions, adapted to new technologies and new media, evolved its rules and equipment while maintaining its essential character. The fundamental challenge remains unchanged. Hit a ball from here to there across varied terrain in as few strokes as possible. Simple in concept, endlessly complex in execution, frustrating and rewarding in equal measure. The courses will endure, shaped by wind and weather, maintained by dedicated greenkeepers, walked by generations of golfers. The championships will continue, crowning new champions who will add their names to the lists that stretch back over a century and a half. The equipment will evolve, designers and engineers finding new ways to help golfers hit the ball farther and straighter. The stories will accumulate, new rivalries emerging, new memorable moments being created, new heroes rising to inspire those who come after. And somewhere, right now, someone is playing golf for the first time, feeling that peculiar satisfaction of making solid contact with the ball, watching it fly toward a distant target, understanding immediately why this game has captivated people for centuries. Somewhere, a child is hitting balls at a range, dreaming of future glory. Somewhere, friends are gathering for their weekly game, continuing a ritual that connects them to each other and to everyone who has ever played this game. Somewhere, a player is standing over a crucial putt, feeling the weight of the moment, experiencing that mixture of hope and fear that golf creates so effortlessly. Golf continues. The sun rises over St. Andrews, over Augusta National, over Pebble Beach, over thousands of courses around the world. Golfers tee off, facing the eternal challenge, hoping this will be the round where everything clicks, where the game reveals its secrets, where par or better is achieved on every hole. Most will be disappointed in that hope, but they'll keep coming back, because golf offers something beyond just scores and results. It offers beauty and challenge, companionship and solitude, frustration and joy, connection to history and to nature. The story of golf is ultimately the story of people seeking challenge and finding community, seeking perfection and finding acceptance of imperfection, seeking victory and finding satisfaction in the mere attempt. It's a story without an ending, because as long as there are golf courses and people who want to play, the story continues, new chapters being written, new memories being made, new connections being formed between past and present and future. And so we close our journey through golf's history, but the journey itself never truly ends. The game goes on, the story continues, the challenges remain, and somewhere on a golf course, someone is lining up a putt, taking a swing, experiencing that timeless moment of striking a ball and watching its flight, participating in a tradition that stretches back through centuries, forward into the future, connecting all who play into one long, continuous story of this remarkable game. Rest well, and perhaps dream of perfect drives and hold putts, of beautiful courses and perfect weather, of the game of golf in all its frustrating, rewarding, endless fascination. Good night.